Business Council's first sustainability shot of the 2011-2012 year. We're glad you could all join us here tonight. We want to thank on the front end our sponsors, Cherry Creek Radio and the Independent of Missoula, both helped us put this event on tonight. And also our service providers. Go2Gals provided the food for us tonight. And Liquid Planet and Big Sky Brewing provided the wine and beer for us. And we're off. And MCAT is filming, and of course we are here at the beautiful Loft in downtown Missoula. For those of you who are looking for venues, it's a lovely place to come. Those of you out on online, that is. Tonight, if you need more information about the Sustainable Business Council, here's our website, sbcmontana.org or sustainablebusinesscouncil.org. We'd love to have you join us there, see what else we're doing for the year. After the presentation, I'll give you a brief rundown of some of the other events. But for right now, I want to introduce our speaker, jump right into the meat of tonight's presentation. David Lowenwater is Fill the Gap, is how he described it. He's a member of the SBC and has been for the last 3 years. He's a home energy rater through ResNet, a level 1 thermographer, I actually said the word right, whew, and an Energy Star certified rater. He is here tonight to talk about what you can do to improve your home energy and actually save money, home energy usage, and actually save money doing it. So please give a warm round of welcome to David.
Let's talk about what you can do at your home to reduce your heating costs. That's essentially why I'm here tonight, and hopefully why you're here tonight as well. My name is David Lowenwater. I'm Fill the Gap. I've been in the industry of helping folks reduce energy costs for better part of 4 years now, and it's an interesting business in these economic hard times, so people aren't even spending that much money to try and save money. You'd think it was an investment that you could make, but in any event, it still is an exciting and rewarding field for me to be involved with. So I want to thank you all for coming in this beautiful night to come inside. Maybe it was the wine, maybe it was the talk, I don't care. You're here, thank you. And I want to thank the folks at the Loft for giving the opportunity for us to be here, as well as SBC, so thank you. All right, so reducing energy costs one building at a time. That's pretty much how I approach it. I look at how we go through a building and identify where the problems are and how we go about solving it. I use a really phenomenal tool, and it's called a thermographic infrared camera. Thermography is the science behind it. This house here happens to be, and I don't know if we can close these at all. I don't think you can see. Did that help at all? Yeah. Okay. So this is a house that was built in 2008. It's a new house. It's somebody's idea of a cabin. It's about 3,800 square feet, 26 feet in the peak. I was about 150 feet away when I took this image, and you can see all the heat emanating from the ridge line of this house. Essentially, just because it's built new doesn't mean it's built correctly. And there's a lot of falsification about, well, I just bought a new house, it's built in 2009. That doesn't mean that you got what you really were paying for. So I want to talk to you about the energy efficiencies and talk to you about how to reduce the heat loss as well as reduce the air-conditioned heat or air-conditioned loss as well. These are areas in your building, whether or not it's a home. There are many areas for the structures where existing problems can exist, whether it be in the windows, the attic, the foundations, thermal bridging, which is where you get heat moving from one part of the house to the next. I did some imaging of a house back in May where a wall that was interior 15 feet inside the house had a tremendous amount of heat loss through that wall. It was air movement, and they were losing a lot of heat that way. That's essentially called thermal bridging, moving heat from one area to another. A thermal barrier is something that stops the heat from moving one place to another. We also have to be sure that when we build these homes or when we renovate and remodel these homes, that you're really doing it with safety in mind. CO2 is a big killer. Not having enough fresh air in general is a problem with mold, mildew, and other issues that can come up as a result of that. Hello.
That was exciting.
And so I want to thank you for coming. Preview. Okay. So insulation is a tricky thing, and Job and I were just talking a little bit earlier about what the value is of insulating too well, sealing a house too well, problems that are associated with that. I urge you all that if you're going to go ahead and try and do what you think is the right thing to do in sealing and insulating your house, that you do have somebody inspect that afterwards. The problem is if you don't have enough air changes, you're going to run into a lot of different problems, whether it's for health reasons or for other things that can happen, such as mold and mildew, combustible carbon dioxide, excuse me. So issues that can come about is that is a problem as well. So when building or remodeling, it's the unseen portions of the house that are probably the biggest concern. What do you think you can do about something, and how will it help when you try and resolve it? So using a spray foam insulation is all well and good if it's applied properly. Because if you take a look at this is spray foam insulation. This graph here shows a temperature range, and it's showing a temperature range of 45 degrees here up to a temperature range of 58 degrees here. What has happened with the installation of this foam is that, in fact, it was not consistent. So you're not going to get a consistent R value. So be careful about ensuring that the detail of how it's sprayed in is dealt with properly, because it's really hard to control that. One of the problems in dealing with insulation is falling insulation. In this particular instance, we've got, and you can't see it really well here, you can hear moisture problems in this area. What happened was that they ended up having, and they didn't even know it, one of the drains ended up cracking. Not a drain, a gutter, a downspout cracked, bled into the crawl space, which was an open crawl space. They had all the moisture, they had the insulation gather the moisture. You can see the graying areas here from moisture, and it just fell out. And so this is the underside of the bedroom. And so there are areas where it's just really cold, poorly taken care of in this area. And in addition, you've got a heating system that is totally uninsulated. So you're essentially heating the crawl space, which is open to the outside. So you're losing the heat that would otherwise be going to the house by not insulating it. So these are really big issues. You do have an insulated flex duct here, but it's the larger return where you're losing a tremendous amount of energy. So those are really, really big concerns when you're doing work yourself. Yes? This is a flex duct. Essentially, this is a solid duct, which is essentially a galvanized. And so the flex duct essentially acts as a duct, but it is flexible so that it can move into different spaces. The other thing is there are times when excuse me?
Kind of like my dryer vent.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. One of the other problems that occurs is that with flex duct, you end up having people pinching things off and you reduce flow. And so it's proper installation or improper installation. So another problem, no, that's the same problem.
That's all right.
So now we go back and look at this home where we saw the image in the beginning. We looked at the outside of the house, we looked at the roof line, and we need to understand what was going on within that. So just because you build a new home with R38 in their vaulted ceiling, this is all tongue and groove. You can see all of the connections all along there, those horizontal lines. Tongue and groove, the wall starts, or the roof starts at 15 feet and goes up to 26 feet. This is all the area around there where the heat loss is. Heat loss is significant here, but you're also getting a lot of cooling. This is under a depressurized situation where I'm drawing air down through the ceiling and out through the bottom. All of this area where you've got the heat loss, it's a convection or what's called stack effect. Yes?
Can you explain the colors to me?
Yes. So this is warm and this is cold.
Gee, red and blue, but you're saying that there's heat loss up there.
Well, I've got the heat loss going up this way. You can see areas where there's heat loss all the way along here. One would think if this was properly sealed and built that you would see a fairly consistent heat level all the way through here. What's happened is that they didn't put what's called an air barrier between the tongue and groove and the insulation. And so air goes up through the tongue and groove and creates what's called stack effect. It just pulls that heat right on up and out, and you saw the top of the roof outside. So this is a new house, 3,800 square feet. It's a second home. They kept it mostly at 55 degrees. And 2 years ago when it was mild, they lost $4,000 in propane costs between October and February when I went out there. It's a new house. I don't have to do anything to it.
Do we get to ask who built it?
I don't even know. I don't even know. So in this house, we find another situation. Unfortunately, it's the same house. This is an area where they missed insulation within the wall. It was either in there and improperly installed, or it was just missed altogether. I happen to know that in my daughter's bedroom, there is a section of the wall where there is no insulation. So whoever built the house in the 70s just forgot or something. So the point is that with the best intention, with the best builder, you're still going to have an opportunity to mess things up. The point here is that when you're doing this work by yourself, to pay attention to the details, to ensure that you're looking at every single bay or every single cavity to make sure, okay, I've got insulation in there, that I'm sealing this up properly. These are all very important things to look at. I do have an information sheet if you haven't already gotten one. And I've forgotten your name, I'm sorry, but I'm sorry? Karina is holding up this sheet up here. It's for you to take with you. It gives lots of tidbits of information. Thank you, door number 1. And so lots of good information about what you can do for yourself. Yes, question?
Can you go back to the previous one? Is the blue like cold air being pulled in?
Actually, this is before I created a draft in the house. This is a very quiet day, 20 degrees outside. And this is just conduction. If, you hold a spoon, you put it in tea, it gets hot, that's conduction. So this is just conduction to the outside. This is without any air movement at all. This is just sitting there. Now, you start to get...
Because you have warm kind of all around.
Yeah, but look at how strongly warm it is right here. This is essentially a soffit. Do you know what a dormer is?
Yes.
Okay, so you kick out the house and you put a window in there. This is essentially the roof line right here. Okay?
Gotcha.
And so they did a really good job right here, which makes up about 20% of that entire...
Because heat rises or because they were inefficient?
Actually, heat goes to cold. It doesn't matter if it's up or down or sideways. So one of the laws of thermography or thermodynamics is that heat goes to cold, period.
Wow.
So an interesting factor, I'll be right with you. An interesting fact is that just because you've got well-insulated ceiling or attic doesn't mean that you're not losing heat in your foundation. And if you model it out using modeling software such as I have, you can actually see a significant amount of heat loss just going through concrete. Most people don't know it's not a good insulator. In fact, 8 inches is about equal to a single pane of window.
Really?
Yeah. Which is about R1.
Excellent.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's good. So, your question then?
I just wondered if it was like pulling cold around.
Yeah, no, it's not. This is just the areas where it's missing and where you've got the least amount of heat resistance. Okay, our value is resistance to heat.
What would it look like if it was a
Well sealed?
healthy room? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would essentially see all of that in red, or as close to red as possible. Heat rises, so it might be a little bit darker here than here, but I would still expect to see it. And if it's sealed properly here and properly insulated all the way around, I would expect, and you architects tell me, Kent, I don't know what you've got in mind about the answer to that, but I would say you're still going to see a little bit of cold here. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be a lot better than what you're seeing here. So when this home was built, different home, this is a timber frame addition to a home built in the 60s. The addition was built in the late 90s, or actually, yeah, late 90s. The contractor totally forgot to put insulation on the top side here. This is the timber frame right here. Okay, this is his bedroom, and he looks at this triangle, these triangles every single day, and he's freezing in there. And this guy was keeping his house at 60 degrees because he was not affording the heating bills. I went up, crawled around, didn't take thermography to figure it out, but it took thermography to at least identify the spot. Got up, crawled around. You'll see some other images of this house, and there was just nothing. So you've got wallboard, which may have an R value of 2, 2.5, maybe if you're lucky. Not that much? Okay. So that's a significant piece of the problem there. Other places in his house were there. So just notice that the cold areas are where the insulation is missing or just poorly installed. Somebody had gone through this guy's attic and moved insulation and never moved it back. And it was just a huge issue. But you laugh about it, but I have been in way too many houses where you're traipsing through on the rafters, on the trusses, and walking through on the bottom cord, and you're making a wake right through that cellulose or fiberglass, and all of a sudden you've reduced that R value wherever you go. In this case, it was batting, which is rolled or unrolled insulation, where they moved it. But in many cases, you'll take a significant R48 and drop it down to about an R30 just by walking through on top of the trusses, or even less, depending on whether they're 4-inch or 6-inch cords. So
So if I had to anticipate what the cause of the movement of the batting, when we have roofing done on our house, do we need to be vigilant that indeed whatever happens is...
don't know. Likelihood is that they're not even going to touch the insulation if they're roofing, if they're working it from the outside. In fact, I would argue that most roofers couldn't care less about the insulation, have nothing to do with it. Even if they see there's no insulation, they do nothing and say nothing about it to the homeowner.
So how does that happen? How does it go away, or was it just never there?
It's the guy who's.
They moved it. So it's heavier here in this area, but it was just moved.
Oh, a new chandelier! Okay, so it's coming from the bottom up, not the top down.
Could be.
Could be.
Yeah. You had a question, sir, a minute ago, and I caught you with food in your mouth, which is perfect timing. That gives me a chance to breathe and focus on you.
I have a lot of questions, and I apologize for coming in late.
No problem.
Is it not true that heat rises when there's cool air to replace the heat, or replace the volume of heat that is rising? I understand that heat goes to cold, but a hot air balloon rises because the air is hotter and less dense, right?
Generally, you're going to find that within a house with convection currents, your heat is going to rise, your cool air is going to be downstairs, and your hotter air is going to be upstairs. That would be general conventions of convection. But without replacing it with cold air, you're still going to have the cooler air drop. So just from a general standard, hot air is going to rise, cold air is going to drop. But from the law of thermodynamics, now you start to move into a different area of how does that heat actually move, other than within air and convection currents in there. How is heat going to move out of the house otherwise? Does that make sense?
No.
Okay.
It's building science,
Yeah.
and it's late in the day.
Question, Lisa.
I'd like to go back to this idea of the concrete, 8 inches of concrete being equivalent to a single pane of glass.
Right.
So our whole foundation, I mean, we have our basement has got about 8 inches, right, of concrete?
Yeah, so you're going to be about at 7.5 feet.
Yeah, and we just spent a bunch of money on new windows down there thinking that was
Yeah.
it, not so much.
No.
So, what,
The guy who put in the windows said you need to frame out the concrete and insulate it.
yeah,
Perfect.
is that what you need to do?
Yeah.
Because currently it has carpet on it, because it wasn't 17.
Carpet on the foundation?
Doesn't glued right onto.
Sweet. Yeah, that'll give you an R.25. Good. Good. Yes. Yeah, Ken?
In relation to the lady who's going to put a new roof on her house,
Yeah.
if you were to do a rigid poly ISO or
Sure.
rigid foam on the exterior of the sheeting, and then do your roofing on top of that, is that going to save energy? I know it probably depends on venting and everything like that.
Exactly. That's where I was going to go. I mean, what are you doing with the rest of the house? Are you creating a conditioned space in the attic? Is that what your intent is? And I don't know why you do that, because now all of a sudden you've got that extra cubic foot or footage of airspace that, although it's insulated and you're reducing air from moving there, why not reduce that area and keep it down to the bottom chord on the house, which is the attic floor? Yeah. I don't know why you would want to do that unless you're using it as a living space. Well, cathedral ceiling, but not in an open attic, as he's suggesting. Yeah. Kent, you were going to say?
I was just going to say, with the basement type of situation, it's in one way you see very common is to insulate on the inside. You build a wall in there and put insulation on there, and it's actually better to put the insulation on the outside.
On the outside.
You've got the thermal mass on the inside where it's holding the heat.
And the modeling software that I use, you actually get warmer or lose less heat every 1/10 of an inch, and it grades it out based on how far down we're going, and then we're losing less heat down here than up here because of the frost line and all of that. So those are things that are considered. Not that you should put R15 here and R7 here, just insulate consistently, but Kent's right. You know, if you can get outside with
You're
a small...
talking about a new construction.
No, just going outside and putting some isoboard or some other foam board on the outside and just build a trench and then face it with something that's going to protect it.
Doesn't have to go all the way to the footing.
I would
just bury it.
Well,
In Energy Star construction, when we're talking about insulating a foundation, you want to go 2 feet down and 2 feet out, or 4 feet out, or 4 feet down. So whatever you want to do, you want to have a 4-foot area where you are encompassing some insulation of the ground and or the foundation for 4 feet.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, good questions. And so now this is looking at this image here, but now let's get into your question about, was that air movement? This is what air movement looks like. Now we're starting to see the structure, the top plate areas here where air is actually infiltrating the building.
So tell me what I'm looking at.
Okay, what you're looking at is a wall and another wall here. Okay, you're looking at a corner.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, looking right here.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Okay.
And what I'm looking at is a roof line here. This is a vaulted ceiling. And I'm looking at some ornamented beam of some sort. And right behind there, or right under there, where the drywall comes up to this beam, we have got a lot of air movement in this area. And it's significant. This area is fairly solid. I just noticed this, and I shouldn't comment on it, but I don't know what that is. Looks like the Ferris wheel. I don't know. Looks like a Ferris wheel. Anyway, the point is that there are ways of showing a myriad of different examples of when a construction occurs, how it is possible to tell what is going on without much oversight. But some oversight occurs, and that is the sealing of this particular area, or perhaps insulation. It's possible to have the insulation there and the air wash over it and still show this type of an image. Question?
Do you have to take pictures at night or?
No. Thermography, all I need is what's called a delta T. I need 15 degrees difference between inside and outside, whether it's warmer inside, hotter inside, colder outside, doesn't matter. I need to have that so I can start to show images like that. Otherwise, everything starts to bleed together and look like this.
Is that a minimum or just?
That's a minimum. I mean, I can go whatever. My camera is sensitive from minus 22 degrees up to 700 degrees. So it's industrial as well, so I can do industrial machinery, get into motors and that type of stuff on cars, looking at drivetrain axles and things like that to find out where things are overheating, bearing issues as well. So, you know, one of the things is that when people build a house, and I was talking with Job about it, I have a personal opinion, and that opinion is when you're building a house or remodeling a house, go for what you can't see first and do the best darn job you can of keeping the energy within the home. If you insulate well and if you seal it well, which means not too tight, not too loose, and you can't tell while you're building, it's got to be tested. You want to have 4 air changes an hour. There are philosophies about going too tight and then just doing really good ventilation. I have a philosophy that what happens when the ventilation, or if it breaks down, what do you do then? So there are concerns about that. As we start to improve and enhance the ways in which we can seal and insulate, we also create compounded problems, and we just have to be careful of that and build that into the process. And so from there, I don't know where I was going with that statement. Oh, stay away from the granite countertops. Go to those later. And some people will react just like that and say, well, that's silly. Why would we do that?
I was just like,
No. But the reason,
like a non sequitur.
but some people would say, you know, I want to have what I can see. Well,
Oh, I see. Sorry.
so the whole thing is spend the money on the things you can't see first to make a better home and a more comfortable home. The savings that you'll reap over the next few years will pay for those counters. Otherwise, you're just going to lose it. Question?
So where your decorative beam is up there?
Yeah.
And the roof coming down, so that's wood, presumably.
Yeah. Save for the fact that it is also right up against an attic space on the other side of this wall where it's well insulated against the vertical wall on both sides. So this is just clearly air leakage here.
And
So, I mean,
that's
most
probably
people,
because they
when
didn't
when
seal
they put
it.
the insulation up,
Yeah.
you know, they're just gonna go very logically through each bay.
Yeah, so what happened, logically, as I indicated, my daughter's got a bay that's empty.
Yeah, I mean, that stuff happens, but is that what you're seeing here?
No, I'm not so certain because I haven't taken the wall apart. I can only tell you what I see, not what I don't see. So what I see is colder temperatures here. I see air washing coming down here. I have no idea because I'm not looking at the stud cavities here. I'm not seeing those particular cavities because this is also an interior wall. So I don't know what's going on in this wall. All I see is wind washing.
So when you're building, does wood have a R factor, I guess?
Yes.
Right. I mean, does it range from 1 to 7 or something?
No, I mean I don't remember the R factors. Architects help me out. 1.5,
Pretty small.
1.5 per inch or something like that.
Better than glass.
Better than glass. Yeah. Yeah. So I would always argue. I mean, if you're building and you want my advice, I might give you some, and that is, if you're building, build as much wall as possible. Stay away from window. There you're going to see your savings. Anything from there, now you're going to be dealing with what am I giving up in order to gain a view. Yeah. So yeah, you're going to get R value out of the wood. You know, you get all these folks in the log building industry that say, yeah, I've got an energy efficient home. I've got 8-inch logs. You've got 8-inch logs at the center. You've got maybe an R12 at the center. And then you start to deal with the diminishing returns at that point. How effective is it? Especially with the checking and the warping and the twisting and all of that. Okay, so let's go upstairs and start at the top of the house now that we have an understanding of what we can see through thermography that you can't see otherwise. And again, just putting your hand up to a 26-foot high ceiling doesn't make sense. So thermography is a great tool for that. But if you've rolled instead of blown insulation, then there is a proper way to install it. First, to follow the cord. This is the bottom cord here. And you lay the insulation in there, and then you go across the top, just to make sure that because your R value of wood is less than your R value of insulation, you want to make sure you've got a consistent and a higher level of insulation all the way across. Make sense? You want to just cover those low R value areas. This is an interesting image in the attic. This is an attic hatch. And one of the things that most people don't think about is how a ceiling or an attic is insulated, and you've got to get a way into and out of that attic, and that's through the hatch. A really good way to go about sealing it and fixing it is to make sure that you've got close to the same amount of insulation on the attic hatch, built into the hatch, as you do for the rest of the ceiling. I've got 3 inches of foam board, which gives me an R15. It's certainly not quite as close, but I'll show you here what you do. And that is to take and build a rim around the attic hatch, and then you insulate up there, and you also put weather stripping here. And so at this, well, you put the weather stripping either here or on the attic hatch itself. I've got it on the hatch, so I continually come down on it, and then I latch it so that I'm creating a very tight seal so I don't get air movement, so I don't get this. Okay, a tremendous amount of heat is lost through that 4 square foot area. Now we go all the way downstairs. And An exterior penetration, which is this, is how pipes and wires get into and out of the house. Here's a foundation. That just looks jolly with all kinds of moisture there. Classic older home, lots of air leakage in this particular home. 4,000 square feet. Again, we shoot for, with the new energy code, we shoot for 4 air changes an hour. They've got 10.7. A lot of it is coming through this area. Notice that in this crawl space, there's no insulation in the floor. Heat goes down through the floor. Air goes down through the floor. Air comes in through here. You're getting a tremendous amount of air exchange underneath. In fact, there were also mice down there. So you've got all of those penetrations. You get rodents. You get critters of any shape. I didn't see any snakes yet.
Can I just ask, what do you mean 4 air changes an hour?
That's mechanical. So if I put a blower door in, a blower door is a large fan. So I seal and I make sure that all the doors are closed. All the windows are shut tight. All the vents are pretty much in the stationary position. I then put a sealed unit in a doorway and I depressurize or pressurize your house to equate to what would be a wind washing of your entire house of a 20-mile-an-hour wind. Okay? And so what I'm seeing then is if you've got a 20-mile-an-hour breeze outside, what's going to happen? What's the effect on the inside of the house? Okay? So when we're talking about air exchanges, I want to measure that with a calibrated unit, and I want to make sure that mechanically I'm moving 4 air changes through the entire house in an hour as a result of the leakage rate. So more than that, then I've got more heat loss. And what I can do with my tools is evaluate how much money you're losing through air loss versus through thermography, which shows me different ways heat is being lost. That's more convection and conduction and perhaps radiation of heat, 3 different ways that heat can be transferred. The thermography helps show that real clearly. So the blower door is a quantity or a quantifier. The thermography is the qualifier. It says, okay, where is this actually happening? You and I can walk around a house and put our hand by a window when that's on and figure those out. Those are the easy things. But the thermography helps you with the areas that you can't tell and you can't reach. So the 4 air changes an hour means that you've still got a healthy home. You've got enough air changes for survival. And it's based on per person square footage, actually cubic footage, lots of factors that go into that. And so that's what we mean by air changes. Now, we also do air changes natural, which is more like 0.35 air changes per person. And that's how we calculate it that way. So in looking at this, we want to make sure that we don't overseal. It's still the same problem. If I go through and I blow all kinds of expandable foam in here, what's going to happen to the rest of the house? And we always have to think about what affects everything, everything affects everything else, and by what I'm doing here, how is it going to affect me here? The sad reality is that unless you get it tested, you really don't know. You can make all these adjustments in the world and build a really wonderful house. I was in a house by a really good green builder in town back in January. The homeowner was very frustrated because she was finding that it was really cold in the basement. She had insulated foam in the basement where you pour the concrete into these insulated foam pieces. And so it creates this really nice insulation on the outside and the insulation on the inside, giving you about an R23. Okay, so she did it right. Problem was that there was a bump out. The contractor totally missed it, didn't seal it, had tremendous amount of cold air. It was a 20 square foot section of the bumped out wall that was bleeding cold air and unsealed into the basement. You could see daylight down there. So this is a green builder. So it doesn't mean that people are following the right ways of doing things or looking at all of the details about building. So these are just really concerns that come up when you take a look at it, at building your own home. So we've already addressed this, but this is just another area where you've got flex duct, you've got insulation falling. It's even falling here. I mean, it's up there. It was intended to be up there. It's not enough. It's not installed properly. and how do you go about making sure that those things are installed properly. If I were to do this, I would take a webbing of string and I would just put nails in here or screws, and I would just weave back and forth to make sure that that insulation is kept there. The other thing is you want the insulation to be touching the floor. You don't want to have air spaces that are showing here. You don't want the insulation just to be resting on this ridge, because now you're going to have an air space between the insulation and the bottom of the floor, creating a convection current, letting that air to move through. You want to fill that space. And if you're not going to fill that space, you at least want the insulation to touch the floor so you eliminate the air movement.
What R value are you looking for a crawl space?
You know, I'd put as much as you can fit in there, quite frankly. And so if you've got 8 or 12 inches in there, if you can get a 12-inch bat, you're looking at R36, close to it, I'd do it. Because this is essentially an unconditioned space. It's the same thing as the lid. You're going to have heat getting lost. You can do whatever you want. You can go to an R18 or an R15. You can put a couple of sheets of ISO up in there. Whatever you're going to do, you're still going to be effective. But I guess I don't know. Northwestern Energy Star homes, I think the Energy Star requirement is at least R30.
David, I can speak a little bit to that. The energy code says that just what you did is that you need to fill that cavity.
Yep. Yeah. So R30 is probably going to be the minimum that I would say you get away with. And again, depending on how it's made, you may have air movement in here. Anymore, a lot of these floors are glued right down to the trusses. But in older homes, if you've got this issue, you may not have that happening. The other thing is when we start talking about gluing and screwing everything and tightening everything down, I also think about off-gassing. And that's one of the things that are inherent about what we bring into our home. We're bringing in a computer, we're bringing in new sofas, we're bringing in carpets that are not wool it's not a jute bottom. You're bringing man-made materials into your home. If your home is too tight, you're going to feel the effects of this off-gassing. Whether it's immediate, you're not going to necessarily know, but I promise you that it's going to have an effect on you. Off-gassing is a huge issue as far as I'm concerned. What are you doing to maintain your health within your home? It can be a thermos bottle, and you can run into big problems that way. So too many people are living in buildings with the wrong size furnace. Bigger is the way that it was originally installed. The house is 2,000 square feet. Yeah, let's heat this thing for 2,500 square feet. You put a forced air furnace in, you're turning on and off, and the circulation of the air is not as efficient as it ought to be. There are just things to be concerned about when you're getting a new furnace, that you think about getting it sized right and also installed correctly. One of the things about furnaces is that if you look at this furnace here, it's got leaks all over it. This is not sealed, this is not sealed, these are not sealed, this area is not sealed. This is mastic, and to do a proper job, you go through and make sure that this goop, which is called mastic, is applied. It's like a putty, and it's flexible, and it hardens, and it's the best way you can go ahead doing it. Energy Star requires it. It's a really good way to go about working on your own home. A furnace must be sized to a building, and heat loss calculations should be made by the people who are doing the installation. But please consider the following, and it's not a complete list if you're going to do it on your own. Square footage of your windows, the square footage of your doors, type and amount of insulation in your ceilings and walls. The total of calculated heat loss in BTUs is rated on an hourly basis. And so then the size of the furnace closely matches that. You're not going to get furnaces that are in BTUs 90, 85, 80, 75. It's not going to be small differences in furnace sizes. You might go from a 30 to a 60 to an 80, and you have to deal with the jump. But understand that you want to get close in size as possible, because you don't want to run into other problems with too much moisture and not enough air exchange and all of those things when you install those. The proper installation and sealing of the ductwork is of great importance. Unsealed ducts will travel through walls. If you've got it in an unconditioned crawl space or an unconditioned attic, then you can be bringing bad things as well as cold air into the house when you turn it on, sucking air from one place and bringing it to the other. In a wall that's got mold in it can be really detrimental to you as well. So making sure that it's sized, making sure that it's sealed, all of these things are of grave concern and things that are valuable to take into consideration. The other thing about insulation, by the way, is that fiberglass and cellulose are porous. The house with those triangles, I kept talking to the gentleman who owns the house about what he can do to deal with all of the air leakage he had in the house. He said, well, I'll just go up there and put some fiberglass in there. No, Bill, let me, and I had to almost shout at him to say, Bill, will you listen to me? It is not a good solution because fiberglass is porous. You're not going to stop an air leakage by putting fiberglass insulation in that spot. So, having made that strong statement, wraps up my presentation. I do want to thank you very much. That's it. I do want to thank you very much for your time. Hopefully I've been able to answer questions or can continue to answer questions here about energy loss and how to save money in your home. Thank you. Yes, your question.
You were talking about, this home's built in 2008. You figure that it's a new home. It's not having much leakage. There's been changes in building codes.
Yes.
And how much is it addressing this sort of stuff that you can feel more comfortable that you're having something built and it's being built to code and that these kind of things aren't being overlooked?
One of the things that Energy Code does not deal with from a health perspective is mechanical ventilation. So although the requirement is for 4 air changes an hour or less, they don't also go far enough with that to say from a health perspective, yeah, we're coming in at 2.17, you need to have a mechanical ventilation in there. I tell the homeowners that. I had a homeowner with exactly that value, 2.17. He was putting his parents in there, moving in from the east. And I said, sizable house may be an issue, may not be an issue, but this is so tight that I would urge you to do that. They can attach to furnaces, existing equipment. As far as ensuring that you're getting a house that's not too tight, you can't, unless you get it tested. There are 2 ways that the city requires to have a house tested, either a visual insulation inspection, which does nothing for air values or air changes, or a blower door test, which does nothing to address insulation values. So there's not a lot of continuity there yet. I think they're still trying to figure out how to go about enforcing some of that stuff. They've taken on the idea or the challenge of doing the insulation installation right now, or insulation inspection right now, which is also a tricky thing depending on how you build your home. So the best way is to just follow code. If it's built well enough but not too tight and there's no mechanical ventilation, hopefully you're not going to be in a house where you're going to suffocate. Yeah, it's not, that's being ridiculous. But you could still end up with some health problems as a result of not having enough air changes. Did that answer your question? Okay. Other questions?
Can I open a window?
Sure.
Will that work?
Yeah, heat goes right out.
I realize that, but now you put the fear of God.
No, don't mean to do that, and we can talk about that afterwards if you like. I also do consultations, but here I'll gladly talk with you a little bit about what your concerns are, and maybe we can alleviate some of those. I don't mean to instill fear, but I want you to be really conscious of it. Question, Lisa?
You come to residences and you do the blower door test as a preliminary and then use thermography as a secondary assessment?
My rule of thumb, if I'm going to be doing a full audit like that, is to look at the outside of the house first with the thermography, then look at the entire inside of the house with the thermography, then do the blower door, then do the thermography on the inside with the blower door running. So that the first thing I'm looking for is natural heat loss through insulation or other issues that may be going on. As soon as I enact that draft, I'm going to hide the things that I would otherwise be able to see by pulling cold air over it, So I want to look at it in as static a state as possible. Before I go into your home, the house has to have been at a static level of temperature for 3 hours. In other words, if it's 9 o'clock in the morning, I'm coming, I want the heat on at 6 o'clock so that we've got that living temperature at a constant. Because if I'm taking images or looking at walls and ceilings and floors that are on a moving temperature scale, I'm not going to be able to do justice to the process.
Sort of follow up, so you do this audit, this baseline, and then you come with a list of, prescriptive
Yes.
solutions, or
Yes.
you tell us how to prioritize?
Yep, absolutely. I go through, you get a full boat of thermographic images. So you get my quantity data, you get my qualifying data, and then you've got my report with recommendations. Depending on the customer and what's going on, I may go as far as to research what it would cost to do this and that and the other thing on your own versus hiring a contractor to do it. If you're a do-it-yourself person like I am, I'm more wanting to punch a hole in the wall and put my daughter's insulation in there and leave the hole open for a while rather than anything else. Husband-wife team here.
Yes, exactly, they're double teaming.
How does that, to what extent does Northwest Energy do it? They're free once per resident.
So the operative term is free. There's no such thing as a free lunch. We're all paying for it anyway. So it's just coming across in our bills on $1.70 a month or whatever the charge is, you're paying for it. What Northwestern Energy does, from my experience, is a good complement to what I do. And what I mean by that is, I think in whichever order you wish to do it, I would urge that both be done. The caveat with Northwestern Energy is that their reports are pretty standard and they don't put a lot of energy, pardon the pun, into doing a decent amount of reporting. I think it's a boilerplate of recommendations that they make, that if I went to your house or I went to Susan's house or I went to Kent's house, you're going to find a very similar type of recommendation and things to be concerned about. It's not as personalized, number one. Number two, if the house has already been evaluated, you're never going to get them coming out again. Even if you paid them, they don't want the business. Secondly, I knew there was a secondly. If it's a house that's 5 years or younger, they won't come out.
So we were part of the Green Blocks program.
Excellent. Good for you.
And I think that our load tests and those things were done by Northwestern Energy.
Yep.
And then in conjunction with the city program and the recommendations and the granting programs. So they came back as a follow-up.
Good.
Is that what we were supposed to have done? Or is there another step that I shouldn't have relied on Northwestern Energy, who really doesn't have my best interest at heart anyway, to do?
How do you feel about the process and the results?
Well, you have to say my house burned down. And then
I'm sorry?
my house burned up, and then it got rebuilt, and then we had all this stuff put in, and so there's a lot more.
Right, but within the format.
My house is splendid. My power bill has gone down by $400 a month, and that part of that is the solar panels we put on the roof. But more importantly, now I think we might be choking to death after what you said, because I probably like.
If Northwestern Energy actually came back and did an evaluation after the work was done,
Yeah, I'm not choking to death.
no. All I'm saying is that take a look, or you and I can talk about what the results were.
Okay.
And if we can find out how many air changes an hour that you've got after the work was done. I know you won't have a clue right now, but please give me a call. We can talk about that. If it's under 4 air changes an hour, there might be something you want to consider. If it's 4 or 5, you're probably in good shape.
Okay.
Yeah. So don't worry about it yet. Look at the information. Give me a call. Okay. Other questions, ma'am?
I have a question. So I'm new to the area, but I've noticed a lot of these are renters of houses that are sort of broken up into units. And so I guess my question is twofold. What do you see a lot of demand from landlords or sort of rental companies with this, or do renters have rights to request these types of things?
To the second part of the question, I don't know what the rights are with respect to the requirements of a landlord to provide you space in an energy efficient home. okay? I would say it's probably not a single thing that you can do about that. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, if you can find a landlord who is interested in knowing about how comfortable that property is, there's a selling point in they can resell that place for more money if it's more energy efficient, but they can also retain the renters for a longer period of time because they're not catching colds all the time and trying to find a house that's actually warmer. So I would just talk with you that way. I have contacted numerous rental agencies and I've had them send out information to their landlord customers who couldn't care less.
I read very briefly about an incentivization program for rental property around a government program to increase to increase energy efficiency.
Sure.
And I think it's still in its infancy,
Yes.
apropos of that, because Missoula is relatively progressive. I think that there may be things in the works that and again, whether you're aware of them or whatever, I think that is out there. There is some attempt on a larger scale to address energy efficiency, particularly in the rentals. In a town like Missoula, it is not as key as in DC or New York, or where the majority of the homes are rental.
So to respond to that, number one, yes, there are incentive programs in existence even today. The federal government reduced theirs, so it's now 10%, and there are guidelines about what that payoff would be and how it's met. But if it's an installation of windows, it's a $500 window, you get $50 back. But you also are only getting it for the window itself, not for the actual installation. In Montana, it's 25% tax incentive, and it does cover the installation as well.
Well, that's a tax credit.
Tax credit, yeah. Yeah, so these are tax credits I'm talking about. There was a federal program that was being looked at, but too much other stuff has gone on in the meantime to oversee the success of that.
Just curious where that was.
Yeah, but without intending to tick people off from Missoula, Missoula is not as openly energy efficient a community as you would think. Billings is very high into that. There's one particular builder there that does hundreds and hundreds of homes a year and does an Energy Star evaluation on every single one of them. I mean, they actually HERS ratings on every single one of them. They do a phenomenal job over there. And they're not that much bigger than us, but for some reason,
Wind blows harder.
yeah, it does. But it's still interesting that as progressive as Missoula is, it's perhaps anyway. Other questions around the room? Comments? Thank you very. I'm sorry?
Are you hiring?
No, I'm not. Because I can't pay myself enough. So I want to turn this back over to Susan, and thank you again for this opportunity tonight.
Help me out. Thank you so much. We want to thank David for being here tonight. We want to thank all you in the audience for being here and those folks who are tuned in on MCAT. We have some other events coming up for the Sustainable Shot Series. We have 2 more this year. November 16th, Holly Greenwood of Real Cooking will explain how you can eat more sustainably. And on April 18th, Molly Bradford of Sustainable Building Systems will again address some details about energy systems in your house and go into a little bit more detail, or not more detail, but a little bit different direction on approaching energy. We also have our Strive Towards Sustainability workshop on the 18th for businesses. If you'd like to learn how to make your business a little bit more energy efficient and also sustainable in terms of how you deal with your customers and employees, etc., we'd love to have you. And our annual awards ceremony will be October 26th here at the Loft, and you should see some announcements about our awards for the Sustainable Business of the Year and Sustainable Advocate of the Year, etc., coming out in the next month or so. So please join us for those. Thank you and good evening.